Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hired Geek Podcast. This is episode number 142 with Jackson Boyar of Mentor Collective. So it's our first proper episode of this year's season 6. I've been hoping to get Jackson on for a little while. Very grateful for his time to talk about the great work that Mentor Collective is doing, the backstory of how it came to be, and just kind of the inner workings of their approach, which I really love. I've been a mentor myself for my undergrad as an alumni, and I've really enjoyed it. So definitely go check out what they're working on. The great people doing great stuff. And so excited to see what's to come for them. And just really appreciate the time to talk all about it here for the podcast. As usual, go check out the show notes. Go check out our merch store, help support the show, share it out. And without further ado, this is episode number 142 with Jackson Boyar. Well, I am super excited for this episode. This one's been cooking for a while. I've been wanting to have you on, Jackson, for a little while. I'm so glad we have some time today to talk more about the work that you and your team are doing there at Mentor Collective. So we will get right to it. I do not want to waste any more time. If you want to do, as we always do to kick off the episode, introduce yourself and your professional journey of how you got to be where you are today.
Thanks so much, Dustin, and great to be here. Thanks for your patience as we closed out 2021. So my name is Jackson Boyar. I'm co-founder and CEO of Mentor Collective, which is a company that helps over 150 institutions of higher learning run online mentoring programs. And I'm not sure how much you want to hear about the nitty gritty of my professional journey. I can go way back in time, but I'll just start by sharing that Mentor Collective first originated as a pro bono side project. When my co-founder and I graduated college, we were working in a management consulting company, and both of us had a passion for helping international students acclimate to American culture. This originated in our own journeys as international students studying abroad, and we were helping a small number of schools deliver mentorship to their international students to overcome social norms and differences entering American education and to decrease culture shock and build a sense of belonging. And what we learned over time is that this practice of mentoring was prevalent across all offices, departments in higher education. Very rarely was it delivered at scale. And oftentimes, the students who needed mentoring most were not accessing these formalized programs. And so we quickly expanded beyond serving just international students. We ended up quitting our jobs and starting a company, now Mentor Collective, around the cause. And our mission has always been to close equity gaps in higher education. And while we started with international students, we very quickly expanded to first generation college students, to online adult learners, to underrepresented students in STEM. Very broadly, we recognized that mentoring was an under-resourced but high-impact intervention that could improve student success, could close equity gaps in higher education. And we're still very early in our journey today in fulfilling that work, but proud of what we've accomplished.
Yeah, that's great. I appreciate the kind of origin story there, sort of the genesis of the idea and everything. And yeah, I mean, that's what I've been observing your all's work, and what just fascinates me is just that idea of like, it's not a new concept, but kind of the full-hearted approach that you all are taking to it to uh, scale it up and make it as accessible as possible and as effective as possible. Just is really awesome. So I guess if you want to just kind of explain a little bit about your approach and how you actually kind of make all that happen, sort of realize that potential of the mentoring.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're spot on. Mentoring is not a new concept. If you approached a public university campus, uh, there is a good chance that campus has 5 to 15 pockets of mentoring in different departments, in student affairs, in diversity and inclusion, and academic affairs. And mentoring is objectively a good intervention, and it is good for student outcomes. There's a whole body of literature on how the right mentor at the right time can improve graduation rates, can improve career outcomes for students. But the cold, hard reality is that scaling these programs is incredibly time consuming. and resource intensive. So what we observed in our early days is those programs across campus might serve 50, 60, 70 mentorships. And there would often be an incredibly charismatic administrator who had a personal relationship with nearly every single mentor and was driving the program outcomes themselves. But they were also using tools like spreadsheets, pizza parties to train mentors, follow up emails sent manually to nudge mentors and mentees to report some level of engagement. And while that practice works at a small scale, it's very challenging to bring to the broader student community. And there's a body of research on the impact of mentoring in higher education today. And it's very clear that about 50% of college graduates, keeping in mind that those are the folks who make it through higher education, cite having a mentor during their time in undergraduate education. And so we felt like mentoring wasn't fulfilling its promise of impact, and there had to be a way to scale up that work. And so what Mentor Collective does is we're trying to solve the who you know gap in higher education with the recognition that advising, alumni support, faculty support, these are all core, pillars of the higher education experience, but they're not always delivering the social capital necessary to support students. And so we ultimately provide three things. The first is research. We've really committed to running randomized control trials, assessments on sense of belonging and retention to understand what forms of mentorship, what tools in mentorship can be the most effective at driving student outcomes. The second thing we do is services. We help universities design these programs based on that research. We help them manage mentor recruitment, manage mentor training, manage program assessment so that we're improving year over year. And finally, we provide software to help make this practice scalable. So, matching algorithms to ensure the right mentors are matched to the right mentees, that we're managing caseloads effectively, that we're nudging and moving students forward in the programs, and that we're learning and pulling that feedback into something like an SIS or an advising infrastructure to ensure that if a mentor finds a challenge that they can't solve for their mentee, the university can deploy the right resources into that mentoring relationship. And very quickly, our vision has become one where every institution has this mentoring layer of either volunteer or stipend compensated mentors to provide additional support on top of advising, and ensuring that every student going through university, whether they're undergrad, grad student, part-time, online, they all have a mentor who reflects their background and lived experience and can support them on a more personal level.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of get to drop this into is that I have started mentoring with my alma mater, University of Delaware, and it's just kind of interesting because I can like kind of just think back to my experience right now doing this myself because I think, yeah, like it's taking that full-hearted kind of more sophisticated approach with everything that you're outlining of what you do, and um, because obviously there's a lot of support structures in place for students now, but uh, you could have like, yeah, you have a faculty member, or, a coach or advisor and these sort of things. And those all have their place. But what I realize is that like, you don't often have someone who can really like give you focused one-on-one quality time. Like there's other things maybe transactional and, yeah, just, how you framed it too, like how impactful those relationships are to students as they graduate. And, um, yeah, like like you said, there's just so much that is like the cult of personality, or you just have to kind of almost get lucky to benefit from something like this, and just being able to serve it up, one, to be more accessible, but doing it like smarter too is just uh I don't know, it's just really cool to see because I think it is just kind of like upping the game on kind of just across the board. um and I guess if you can speak more to, because like you said, like you are aiming to really honor, what is the student looking for from the mentoring experience? What is the background, that they have that is going to be important to kind of uh, share, with the mentor and everything and have some similarities there. So, we'll break it down two ways of like, the students and their mentors. So if you can expand a little bit more on like the impacts that you see on students through this work. 'Cause like you said, like a lot of the students who do end up finishing, they've had some sort of mentoring relationship, but like, what does that look like, I guess, for students kind of more tangibly?
Yeah, so I'd break down the student impacts into lagging and leading indicators. And to zoom out, our ultimate mission at Mentor Collective is to impact graduation rates and ultimately social mobility. We know a student who graduates college is going to make about $1 million more in lifetime earnings. And so, the college degree remains an incredible gateway to mobility in society. When we look at the impact mentoring can have, it's often who you know that guides you towards the right resources that exist on a college campus. It's who you know that guides you towards internship opportunities, employment opportunities, research opportunities, whether you're a grad student or undergrad student. So the lagging indicator is graduation rate, it's employment, it's those things that universities are touting to their prospective students that we want to impact. But the leading indicators for the mentee is sense of belonging, it's self-efficacy, and it's career decision self-efficacy. And so those are all terms that most student affairs professionals have probably interacted with in some capacity. And they're terms and concepts that in the literature mentorship directly impacts. So not only do we measure those impacts across our mentoring programs, but we're designing our programs to drive sense of belonging. And so you called out a little bit on the matching. How do we find the right mentor for the right mentee? We drive this through a matching survey that sounds simple in nature, but is complex in how it's orchestrated. We're looking to give the mentee agency over who they're matched with, but also remove as much bias from that process and also work around supply and demand constraints of the mentors in the university's network. So some things are really important in particular program designs. For example, if we're mentoring incoming freshmen who are from a first generation background, that might mean something different about the cohort of mentors we need to recruit and train, and would certainly matter in terms of matching criteria. So we look at things like academic major, we look at lived experience, identity, and then ultimately we let the mentor mentee weight the criteria that they think are most important to the matching relationship. But we also have a whole body of science from running over 700 programs in the last 7 years that help us understand what levers are really most important to drive engagement and ultimately those lagging measures like improved retention and graduation rate. So a whole body of science goes into each match, but it's also delivered within the confines of the scale of the mentor network. And this is why we're so focused on scale. The more mentors we have, the more mentees we have in a program, the more deliberate and accurate that match can be.
Yeah, well, I guess that will segue perfectly to talking about the mentors and like the impacts that it has on them. I mean, and I guess if you can clarify too, maybe my understanding is not right, but I believe it is. But that you have an alumni like myself who would be a potential mentor for a student, but would also like other kind of near peer, like, fourth year student mentoring a first year student at the same institution. Like, I think that's just one thing I wanted to clarify. But then also just broadly, like, what do you see is if you kind of had to make that pitch to somebody who might be a mentor, like, what are the impacts for them? Like, what are they kind of getting out of that experience?
Yeah, so there are a couple models of mentoring we use. One, the program you're involved in is alumni mentoring focused or employer mentoring focused, and it typically engages students who are in the latter half of their college experience, whether that is, graduate students or juniors and seniors. We are recruiting typically young alumni, folks who are accessible but have enough professional experience that they can help the student transition into the workforce. Um, the place we started though is peer mentoring, so helping incoming students get matched with peers who are maybe a sophomore or junior or 1 year further into their graduate program. Uh, and across the board, I mean, the value proposition to the mentor is twofold. One is you're building skills that are critical in the workforce today. There's studies that show hiring managers value mentoring skills. It's viewed as a leadership skill that makes you a better manager, a more empathetic colleague. These are things we're working to codify and reflect back to the employer. And if you go on LinkedIn today, you would see thousands of folks who have actually put collective mentoring or other forms of mentoring on their LinkedIn profile. And we think that speaks to the employer demand for the experience. But on a more personal level, there's a ton of research that shows mentoring impacts self efficacy in the mentor. And if you've ever served as a tutor, as a coach of any form, as a mentor of any form, you feel this experience of understanding your own competency as you deliver advice to someone a little bit earlier in the journey. And so, we see a really diverse range of mentors volunteer. It's not always the straight A student. It's not always the super successful alum. It's somebody who has something to give back. And by giving back, they actually build their own competence and their own skill set. So that's something we're measuring among the mentors. And it's one of the things we try to sell to the mentors is how much confidence they'll build by helping a young person navigate the college experience.
Right. Well, and again, just how we've talked about it and kind of just continuing to hammer on is like the ability where, the mentor gets connected into this program, the student plugs in as well, and each side kind of sharing what they're looking to get out of the experience. Like, because otherwise, I don't know how it would happen. Like a person who is willing to give their time and share their experiences and do all this stuff, like, could go unutilized unless they were, again, lucky to talk to the right person at the university to get introduced or something, like just all those sort of like things that could get in the way. So, um, yeah, I mean, it's been really an enjoyable experience for me. It's only been a couple of months, but um, yeah, because they're just like also fellow like history majors and like stuff like that, just like, asking them about their campus experience. So, yeah, it's very meaningful and yeah, a great way to give back and everything. But um, I imagine though, you like everyone else, and I know, I've had to like reschedule mentor meetings and such just because like, the waves of the pandemic ebbing and flowing and just, all sorts of things like you all have been navigating that as well. Like how have you seen, I mean, your team's work or just the work of, mentors, mentees and everything being impacted by the pandemic?
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely rippled through everything that we do. Um, Actually, first and foremost, starting with our partner institutions who had to react very quickly in spring 2020 and are reacting again and again as we go through additional waves and variants. So, institutions are struggling with enrollment across the board. They're down about 5% over the last 2 years, and that's increasing a focus on the student experience, on anything that can impact enrollment and retention. And what we've seen is that's manifest, in my mind, the right way with a greater focus on building inclusive learning environments and a greater focus on mentoring, which is fundamentally a social tool to impact those outcomes. And when you talk about social distancing or learning online, one of the most important things to augment that experience with is a relational experience like mentoring. So we've seen mentoring become more important than ever. On top of this, there's the drain of the pandemic on the administrators and the students and mentors, where incidents of mental health challenges have increased pretty radically. There was a study that came out recently in Inside Higher Ed that said about 51% of students said they had more stress than they did last January. And this is something that's well documented across higher education. So we've seen more students interested in mentoring, more mentors, uh, in some ways, going above and beyond to support their mentees. But what we were fortunate with is that the modality we use at Mentor Collective is one that was sort of pandemic ready. we had a lot of partners approaching us about how to bring their um, in-person mentoring programs online, and that's something that has helped us grow through the last 2 years. But we're growing with recognition that the students we're serving need more support than ever. And we have introduced a host of resources to the mentors so that they're not going at this alone, so that they have a means of handing off more challenging student experiences to professionals. So we have seen an increased rate of housing and food insecurity issues, particularly with some of our 2 year institution partners. Um, we recognize that the mentor, especially if they're a volunteer mentor, should not be responsible for something so severe. And that's where we started to think about our future and how we can interconnect these mentoring relationships into other resource systems, whether it be financial aid offices, emergency financial aid, mental health counseling. There's a whole ecosystem of support we are going to introduce to the mentors so that they can best serve their mentees.
Yeah. I mean, I've just been observing a lot. Yeah. Just how much focus, thankfully, and kind of finally, like digital community building and, uh, that's gotten over these past 2 years, and it's accelerated and I think ingrained so much more of that. And, that it's not going to replace the on campus experience. If anything, it's going to kind of augment it and create those opportunities to kind of give that personal touch to more students. And I think, you know, so many things for, anything that a student is struggling with, like you're only going to see it when it becomes an issue, and hopefully through like a personal mentoring relationship and all that, like you can raise a flag on something that's just, concerning, and maybe you can get ahead of it a little bit earlier than, oh, the student flunked a course because, they are experiencing food insecurity and they, just haven't been able to focus, or, those sort of things. So, um, yeah. And I mean, it for everyone involved too. I mean, that personal relationship in this time of isolation, uh, is going to be really impactful just to, um, create those connections and everything. So, um, yeah, I mean, it's one of those things where it's as important now, if not more than ever, mentoring being a really important aspect of the student experience. But, yeah, I mean, so it's good on you for kind of toughing through it, with everybody else. We've all been just trying to, stay flexible and, uh, do what we can to keep everything, running. So, um, so we've talked about kind of the history, the story, the kind of, recent past. How do you see this work evolving into the future? I mean, it like we said, I mean, this is not like reinventing the wheel. It's just sort of like doing it, doing mentoring smarter. So I'm curious, kind of like what's on your mind that sort of is like, you know, just through like the research and things that you've done. Like, how are you thinking about like what's on the, horizon for you all?
Yeah, I think about a couple different themes. I mean, at a foundational level, we are just scratching the surface of the potential impact in higher education. We've had several 100,000 mentors and mentees engage with us, and there's a lot of learning that's come from that. But there are over 17 million folks in higher education in America today, and there's just so much more impact we can make. So that's a huge focus of our company going forward. Um, but when I think about the future of our impact, it really starts with this concept of the messenger mattering. Um, the typical university has many messengers that interact with students across their journey. There's advising, there is the faculty member, there's the RA, there's all these folks across campus who are there to help. But with more formal position comes more power. And sometimes it becomes more challenging to engage those folks if you are the first in your family to attend college, or those folks don't look like you, don't share the same lived experience. And so I'm interested in increasing the representation of the messenger base. I see mentoring as a means of doing so, and recognizing that this notion of help-seeking behavior doesn't live in every student. In fact, the majority of students, myself included, as a very privileged undergraduate student, I didn't know how to make the most of the resources available to me in college. And it's such a shame to graduate and look back on all the resources I had access to and know that I didn't use them to their full potential. And so I'm interested in Mentor Collective enabling these messengers, these mentors, to point students to those incredible resources on college campuses. So many centaurs, so many online tools that students could have access to while they're in college, but don't take advantage of because they don't know they exist or they don't know how to access them. So I view the mentor, like the advisor, as another messenger that can drive use of those resources that colleges are investing in. Sometimes those resources are very expensive. And by increasing resource utilization, I think we're ultimately impacting student graduation rates and emboldening and reinforcing the value of higher education. So to me, I hope in 10 years from now, the typical university campus, if they're even a physical campus, will have an advising infrastructure, but layered right on top of it is a network of peers or near peer alumni, employer mentors who are charged with enabling all the other resources on campus and building that relational experience into the student journey.
Absolutely. I think that's such a positive and kind of just a effective place to focus is like just the diversity of the mentor pool and uh what they can give. Because obviously there's always going to be a refinement on your all's approach and platform and training and like those sort of things, like that's kind of a given. But I think if many organizations would have kind of a blind spot that you're just going to kind of take who's coming to your door to be a mentor and that sort of thing, but being really thoughtful around uh who you're bringing in to support. Because I'm even thinking like so much of it is like what you're saying, like lived experiences, cultural backgrounds and all that. But like even where it's just like, okay, yeah, we're supporting online students through this mentoring program, like do we have mentors who also like studied online and they can say like, oh yeah, like these are the strategies that help? Because it could even just be like that little kind of hurdle or kind of friction point where it's like, well, I mean, I can't even imagine what it's like, being in a different time zone than the school that you're studying at, online, or, working full time with a family and, getting your degree and that sort of thing. So, um, yeah, I mean, all of that matters. And
And to the
yeah,
point
yeah,
of resources, the mentor doesn't have to be the end all be all to their mentee. There is a referral they can make to someone else in their network, to another mentor in the same program, to literature or content that can help address those more specific challenges. And so the mentor is just a node in this resource ecosystem. They are not the person that has to be an expert on every single issue. And that really connects to mentor training and how we're setting expectations for the mentor, but also equipping them with those referral tools.
yeah, that is something that I find also like really great about the approach is that, yeah, it can just be that this person is like the conduit, that they're raising the flag and, saying like, oh, who the person who can give you, the best level of service is going to be this person, or, they don't even have to know who that person is. They're just gonna be like, okay, I'll just make a note of this. And then like, that kind of moves down the pipeline for other folks to kind of grab and be like, oh, okay, this person needs help with this. I'm gonna shoot them a message and, uh, get them in touch with who they need to talk to. So it's like, yeah, the mentor could just kind of be there to absorb everything that's going on, log that conversation and, raise that flag. And then, yeah, it kind of goes from there. So, um, well, yeah, I mean, we're winding down here. We do always like to try to give a quick shout out to any resources that you want to share, stuff that you all have put out, or just other books, podcast articles, things that are grabbing your attention.
Yeah, I'm going to go with something tried and true, which is just the 7 habits of highly effective people. This is something I personally turn to every 1 to 2 years. I don't even read the full book. I read the first couple chapters, and it centers me on my power to interpret the challenges I am facing as an entrepreneur. It's something I instill into the mentoring I do with my alma mater through Mentor Collective. And ultimately, I think these self help, self development books can be overwhelming, but this is a really good one that I turn to. It's maybe the original. And I think the journey of entrepreneurship is incredibly taxing. It can be very lonely at times. I'm lucky to have a great co-founder who's going through it with me. But the most powerful thing I've seen, in addition to some of those self-help books, is listening to the stories and failures of other founders, just to normalize what I'm going through and reduce my own imposter syndrome. So it's a little bit less of a book resource, but I've been fortunate to meet other founders, other folks working on challenging issues in higher education, and just being able to vent together, being able to listen and learn. It's what we're trying to accomplish at Mentor Collective, is integrating those social relational resources into the college experience. But I've tried to seek out my own through various networks as I'm going through the founder journey.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that kind of community and stuff is powerful. And it is so interesting because I feel like there's definitely like, and I sometimes like prime people with this for resources, but like you kind of went with like a classic, something that's like always kind of been there for you. And other folks were just like, oh, well, this is like the latest thing that I read. So it's kind of just like a fun game for me, just seeing which way people take it. But yeah, I mean, it's a great book, and definitely great advice as its own kind of resource there, is to find folks who can perhaps be a resource to you, be a kind of part of a good professional community. But yeah, so our final question is if you have any final thoughts or calls to action to end this episode on about this topic of mentoring and all that good stuff.
Well, you've already done it, Dustin, and this is also going to be very predictable, but I would encourage the audience to consider becoming a mentor, whether it is for their alma mater, if they went to college, or a local nonprofit. It's one of the most transformative experiences. It does not take that much time. It might be 1 or 2 hours a month to have a phone call or two and change a person's trajectory. I think when we hire somebody at Mentor Collective, we always ask, did they have a mentor in college or in their life? And, inevitably it was somebody who gave them extra time, went above and beyond, that helped them make the most of their college experience, make the most of their time as a young professional. And so those opportunities are sitting there for those who want to give back. And I would encourage you to do so, because it feels good and it is good for folks who get your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. Yeah. Highly recommend. So yeah, thank you so much, Jackson, for hanging out and sharing all that you did, and for doing this great work. And we'll have ways to connect with you and the work that you do and everything that you mentioned in the show notes as usual. But yeah, this is great. So glad we finally got to do this, and just kind of help celebrate the great work that you all are doing, and can't wait to see what you all have up your sleeve next.
Thanks so much, Dustin.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the podcast. Make sure to rate, review, and subscribe so you never miss an episode. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you in the next episode of the Higher Ed Geek podcast.